Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be covering one topic, and that topic is the do nots topic. So what we're going to be talking about is all those things in real estate you should not do. Some of them may surprise you. They seem like there's usually it's because there's an unintended consequence. It's not that it's a terrible thing to do, just it won't work out the way you think it's going to work out, or it may create issues down the road. So the first one we're going to talk about is contractor lockboxes codes in the private remarks. So when you have a property and you have to put a contractor lockbox code or a front door code, perhaps this is one of the houses with a keypad on the front door, and there's a combination code that needs to be used to access that front door keypad. That code should not go in the private remarks section. Theoretically, that section is only for realtors, and only realtors should be able to see it. However, I am sure you've been in a listing before and you see that the private version of the MLS report is printed out and sitting on the countertop in the kitchen. So, that's because that listing agent is hoping to brand themselves, and the private remarks section is going to have their branding all over it. So will the public. I don't know why I see these private ones in listings, but I do. So we're exposing those contractor lockbox codes or the front door keypad codes to the general public when we leave those private remarks papers, those private versions of the MLS printouts laying around. The other reason would be because you don't want to let your client have access to it because you don't know who they're going to give it to. I know that sounds terrible, but it would not be unheard of for a buyer to tell the home inspector, go ahead and swing by that vacant house and take a look at it. Or it's probably not a licensed home inspector. It's probably their brother-in-law or their cousin or somebody who's a handyman. And you don't want to let the code out. That is called unauthorized access. So unauthorized access is a big deal. If you serve up at RVAR in any capacity on any of the board of director seats or the committees that see the complaints, you're going to understand that it is a big deal when it comes through, because you can't let just anybody in the house. Unauthorized access could also be going into the home for a purpose other than what's been given to you. So you have been given permission to go show the home. You've not necessarily been given permission to bring a home inspector in. I went last week and looked at an investment property with some of my clients, and it was $64,000 in Salem. So the poor woman, who it was her in-laws' house, she had probably 30 groups come through every day. So at that point, they weren't scheduling appointments anymore. She was just there, and she would kind of walk you through the property. And she told us that at least 5 groups had come through with some sort of home inspector that they'd hired to come in and take a look at the house. Now, I hope that means that those agents who came with those people had gotten permission from the listing agent to bring the home inspector through, because their purpose to be in that home is to view the property, not to have an inspection done on the property. It could discover material defects that may then put some obligation on the listing agent that they weren't expecting. The seller, of course, as you know, is not required to make hardly any disclosures in the state of Virginia with regards to the condition of the property. That, of course, would not include lead-based paint. You have to disclose whether you have any knowledge about lead-based paint, polybutylene pipes, Chinese drywall, the things that are listed on the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Form on the long form. But for the rest of the condition of the home, the seller has no disclosure obligations, but the listing agent does. So if you take a home inspector through a vacant listing and then you call the listing agent and you say, hey, we're real concerned about this, that, and that we discovered. You've now given disclosure obligations to that listing agent that they wouldn't have had, and they did not give you permission to bring a home inspector in there. And home inspectors just trust that you have permission to be bringing them. I think it would be odd for a home inspector to go around the buyer's agent and call the listing agent and say, hey, do I have permission to go in there? They're assuming that you've done your job as the buyer's agent and you have permission to take them in there. So unauthorized access is a huge deal. Do not put contractor lockbox codes or front door keypad codes in the private remarks. Instead, if it has a keypad on the front door, what you should be doing is writing down the keypad code on a piece of paper and putting it in the lockbox, so that when they open that Supra lockbox, they can then access that piece of paper that has the front door code on it and put it back into that lockbox, okay? There are a lot of agents who are putting contractor lockbox codes directly in the private remarks section. That's not against the rules. You can do that. I just think it's very risky to do it. So moving on to not disclosing known material defects. So piggybacking on my previous conversation, once a listing agent knows about known material defects, it does trigger them to be obligated to disclose those material defects. Again, the seller does not have those same disclosure obligations because we're in a buyer beware state, but the agent most definitely does. And they have to disclose them at latest before contract writing, okay? That's why you'll see so many private remarks fields filled with things like, and it's always in realtor language, like tiny trickle of water during prolonged rains, right? It's never every time it rains, we get water in the basement. It's always, they're going to do the bare minimum disclosure there. But they are doing the disclosure. So they put it in the private remarks to get in front of it. I will put flood insurance requirements in private remarks, not because I'm obligated to disclose that as early as the moment they see it, but something like flood insurance, where we're not going to really be able to get around that, I want to get in front of it and start having those conversations early about flood insurance on the property. But I really wouldn't be required to disclose that until somebody tells me they're writing a contract, okay? However, I don't ever want to appear like I've done a bait and switch, like I surprise them with knowledge of flood insurance. It's a little easier to know that ahead of time as a buyer's agent now that we have CRS tax data. So any listing on the MLS, you can click the CRS tax data tab, and it's going to bring up all of the information you can find on the internet, including the FEMA flood map information. So there will be FEMA's listings on there as well. So you can look and see. And I was showing a property last week to another client, and it's right on Tinker Creek, but it's 5 acres. And when I pulled it up on CRS tax data, it had 6 different FEMA categorizations on it, because there's so many different parts of the property, and several of them differ in what part of the flood zone they're in. So that can be a little tricky, and you have to navigate that, and you're welcome to call me if you have questions about it. Yes, Deepak.
I remember a while back we talked about having people going in there, like putting a lockbox and letting the home inspector go in them by themselves. Is that okay to do that now? I know in the past we talked about it wasn't okay, that you had to be there or somebody has to be there with them.
So that comes down to us supervising the access to the home.
Okay.
So I would, as a listing agent and a buyer's agent, I would never allow that to happen unless all parties agree. If all parties agree, that's perfectly fine. Okay. It's when you don't have written permission to do so. So as a buyer's agent, I'm always going to ask the listing agent, I'm going to say, hey, may I meet the home inspector at the house? And then may I go away and let them lock up when they're finished? And if they say, no, we'd really rather have you with the home inspector the whole time, that's that. I'm gonna have to be there. I have to supervise everyone who I'm allowing in that home. So certainly if it's a vacant home, I would suspect that listing agents are fine with you leaving the home inspector to the job. It's much easier now that home inspectors are licensed by the state for a seller to have some comfort level, that it's not just any old home inspector, that they're licensed through the state, same as we are. Now that they have all those credentials, then I think I've found it to be a little more acceptable to just leave them to their thing, you know? So it's just having written permission, Deepak.
All right, thank you.
Of course, of course. Moving on, does anybody have any questions about disclosing known material defects? The last thing I'll say about that is sometimes it will cost you a listing, you know, and sometimes you may want to get out of the listing. I remember a couple of years ago when an agent called me in a panic because their transaction had fallen apart, and through the inspection period of that transaction, they had discovered some really, really unfit plumbing in the basement. A family member had done it for the current owners. It was not done correctly. It was backing up, and it was not functioning properly. And it was going to be an expensive fix. And the sellers were telling our agent, you know, no, this is, we're selling the house as is, so I don't want you to disclose that. And he really had to struggle explaining to them how there really were only two choices for him. And that was disclose this material known fact about the house, or he was going to have to terminate the listing. It could get a little tricky if they don't let you terminate the listing. You know, listing agreements are a bilateral contract. Both parties have to agree to release each other. However, I would never, ever want you to cost yourself your license or cost yourself any sort of liability issue for not disclosing a material defect. So he had to work double time convincing them that we just need to get it fixed, that it's going to come up on every home inspection, that if he did not disclose it, he would lose his license potentially. And if he did not disclose it, he potentially, and me, could be called into a fraud, you know, lawsuit later. So eventually he brought them around to the idea of just going ahead and fixing it, because otherwise, if they didn't, they were really narrowing their buyer group down to cash buyers who didn't want to have inspections. And as you guys all know, cash buyers who don't want inspections don't pay a lot for houses, and there aren't that many of them out there. So what he finally was able to make them realize is that this was a problem. We needed to get in front of it. We needed to fix it. We needed to fix it before we put it back on the market. So he was very relieved when they finally acquiesced and had the plumbing done correctly. Now, since the transaction had fallen through and been released, there was no requirement for the sellers to have a licensed plumber do that work. Do I think it's a good idea? Absolutely. However, it's only the terms of a purchase agreement that require that the work in the home be done by a licensed contractor. So once the purchase agreement had been released, terminated and released by the buyer, when we were in that sort of withdrawn status before it went back on the market, and even if we'd stayed in active status or gone right back on market status, it could have been a handyman, it could have been a family member, it could have been the owner themselves that could correct the problem. It's only when you're under contract with a purchase agreement that that requirement exists, that it must be done by a licensed contractor. Okay, so that's the other thing I use as leverage with my sellers, is I say, listen, so they've terminated, they're gone, we're releasing them. Let's get it fixed now with a, you know, plumber who's working, you know, weekends, or a friend, you know, who used to do plumbing, or a handyman even. Let's get it done now, cheaper than if we were to have it done by a licensed contractor. So maybe it's a, you know, maybe it's a hole in the drywall or a vinyl siding piece that needs to be replaced, something that doesn't require specialized attention by a specialist. That can be done by a handyman and much less expensive than getting under contract again with a new buyer and it having to be done by the licensed contractor. Any questions about that at all? Okay, you guys are a very polite crowd this morning. Okay, so let's talk about mine and Jennifer's pet peeve of money orders, cash, or cashier's checks for earnest money. Okay, we get them a lot. If you bring them to us, either cash money cashier's checks or money orders, we're going to accept it, but we are going to tell you this is going to bite you in the rear end later. Because if you're doing an FHA, VA, USDA loan, VHDA loan, and occasionally conventional loans, the lender is not going to be able to source those funds easily. And so if they can't source the funds easily, they're likely going to just have you draw up an amendment removing the earnest money deposit from the transaction. Well, that's where I protest, because I don't like that idea. What's the point in having an earnest money if it's going to be released before the transaction is over? There is absolutely no reason for the buyer then to have any skin in the game. They don't have $1,000 earnest money deposit on the hook for being a bad actor. So if they want to walk, just the threat of a lawsuit is all that's still hanging over their head. So that earnest money deposit is a protection for the seller. So if we, as buyer's agents, set it up early on that earnest money is going to have to be removed anyway because it's a cashier's check or a money order, we're really not protecting that seller. Now, I hear you. You're the buyer's agent. It's not your job to protect the seller. But the Realtor Code of Ethics does make it clear that you have to treat them honestly and fairly. So that money order or cashier's check is really honestly not gonna go very far, because the lender's gonna red flag it pretty quickly. I hear you. What do you do about it? Because the younger population does literally not have a checkbook. I hear you. I found out recently my own husband doesn't have a checkbook, hasn't had one in a couple of years. And that surprised me, but it's becoming less and less necessary to have a checkbook. So this is what I'll say. If you are the buyer's agent and they need to give you an earnest money deposit, I want you to instruct them to go to their own bank, have a cashier's check made out of a withdrawal from their personal checking account with their name on it, okay? I don't want them to take $500 from the liquor cabinet and go to the bank and have it turned into a cashier's check. I want them to make it as a withdrawal from their personal bank account, have it converted into a cashier's check at their own bank where they have their bank account. Because then it actually can be sourced. The lender can look at the bank statement, see how on the same day they made a withdrawal of $1,000 and it was converted into a cashier's check that's dated for the same day, okay? And then that does actually let the lender verify the funds, okay? Any questions on that? It's not the end of the world. Do I think it's a best business practice? No. So that's why I'm giving you just a couple little tips that if you have to do a cashier's check, please do it the way I instructed.
And can I chime in there for just 1 minute on that? I know with the competitive offers, earnest monies are coming in higher, and sometimes it's coming in more than what your commission is going to be. So we need more than the day before closing notice that the closing office needs that money, that overage. We are a limited staff. Sometimes it's just 2 in the office. And it's hard for us to be able to drop and leave and make deliveries all over town for earnest monies. And the closing office is not going to come after it. So if you guys aren't available to come get it, we're kind of in a pickle, and it can delay closing if we don't have notice that there is an overage. So just keep that in mind when you are taking large earnest money deposits. Make sure that you're, if it is over, to let us know, or the closing office to know early enough so that we can get the funds over to them.
And I know that this is, I have all seasoned agents on this call, but since I record these, I will say this for the benefit of the new agents who may watch later. The way the commission works is the closing company is going to short the commission check to Wainwright by the amount of the earnest money deposit, because we don't deliver that earnest money deposit back to the settlement company. Instead, they short the commission check by that amount. So if it's a $5,000 earnest money deposit and the commission check is only for $4,500, we have too much money sitting here. We're going to have $500 left over, and they're not going to close. They're going to require us to get that $500 earnest money overage to the settlement company prior to closing. So Jennifer's just asking that we receive some advance notice that needs to happen. Yep. And then what happens is the commission check arrives, and if the earnest money was for $1,000 and your commission check is for $4,500, the settlement company's check is going to be for $3,500. And you're going to bring that to the office, and Jennifer and I are going to put the $1,000 earnest money deposit with that to make the complete $4,500 commission. Jennifer?
We're seeing it a lot because of the way the market is, because everybody's putting down, or a lot of people are putting down larger earnest money deposits. I mean, I had a $10,000 one this week for a $130,000 house. So,
Oof.
Just saying.
I think that's going to be over the commission.
I think it might be.
Yep. Okay, unless anybody has any. Yeah, hey, Walter.
Hey, so getting back to earnest money deposits, I see that our good friends at Lone Wolf Technologies now have a swipe solution so that you can accept debit or credit cards.
Mhm.
Has the MLS board taken a look at that yet?
No, they have not. But I would be happy to put that on our agenda, Walter.
Along with everything else I bring up.
No, that's great. And we had a meeting yesterday, and that did not come up. Lots of other good stuff did, but I will absolutely put that on the what would we call that? It's not really electronic earnest monies, but
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know how they describe it. I mean, I was going to say virtual, but that is certainly not the correct term either.
right.
I don't know how, I think it's probably in the backs. I mean, you guys have Lone Wolf. You could probably root around in your system and see it.
I'm sure I have probably already dismissed some sort of ad about it.
Yeah.
Every time I go on Zip Forms now, I get some sort of pop-up ad for something that I.
Well, when we were in San Francisco last year, that's when I first learned of it.
Me too. I think I was with you at that booth, and it was those two guys who they've made a product just like that, where you can do electronic funds like for earnest money.
And I believe that Lone Wolf then bought them.
Oh, well, aren't they lucky ducks?
That's what they do. So.
Yep. Okay. All right. I've made a note. I'm going to call it electronic earnest money deposits.
It's making me twitch over here because I'm like, how in the world are we going to keep up with that? Okay.
My pleasure to help you.
Yeah, thanks, Walter.
I mean, actually, that might simplify things for you.
Possibly.
Because I'm sure what will happen is it would be basically just a swipe thing, or even taking a picture. You know, now you can even take a picture of the front of the debit card. And when you key it in, it'll probably deposit it directly into the escrow account.
Sounds good.
Like most things, once it's rolled out, it usually makes our lives better.
Yeah. Okay. I'm checking back out until I have more pithy comments or another idea.
Sounds good. I appreciate you. Okay.
I think that
yes, Kathy.
This is Kathy. Hi. You could Venmo the earnest money deposit account.
You could.
Maybe that's what it's sort of like, something like that. Yeah, just directly. But anyway, okay, I'm out.
I have a college student, so I Venmo frequently.
Yes.
Sorry, but could you imagine having Venmo on your escrow account? No, that makes me so nervous. I mean, I had to pay a Poshmark on mine. Remember that?
Oh gosh.
$500 bag.
Yep. Thank you,
All right,
Kathy.
keep going.
Okay, so my next do not is going to be about the septic system field on the MLS input sheet and what we see on the MLS. MLS board is working fervently on this to try to get this simplified. When we made the fields years and years ago for septic, it's, and I should have it pulled up, but I don't. It's unknown, unavailable, private septic, 2-bedroom, private septic, 3-bedroom, so on and so forth, right? The intention for unknown, when you checked the box for unknown, was that you were going, as the listing agent, you were going to go find out and verify what the septic system was by going to the, to go to the county or city courthouse and find out from the health department what the permit said. It was not intended for it to stay in unknown status forever and ever. So there's a lot of conversation around up at RVAR Board of Directors and MLS Board of Directors about how the septic system fields should be handled. So we've just talked earlier in this conversation about how the seller does not have any obligation to disclose anything about the status of the septic system except whether there's a waiver or not. That's why we have the residential septic system disclosure form. So the seller is actually not burdened with an obligation to disclose what type of septic system is in place. However, that's obviously something the buyer is going to want to know. So the giant takeaway I have for you here is do not ever check any of those fields other than unknown unless you actually have a copy of the permit telling you what size septic system is there. Okay. If the seller tells you it's a 3-bedroom septic system, their knowledge base on that might just be that they have 3 bedrooms and they have a septic system. Okay. They might actually have no real knowledge of what type of septic system they have. So in my opinion, and they're not necessarily going to all go with my opinion, I just want our septic fields on the MLS input sheet to be septic system, yes, no, and is the permit attached? That's all I want. I'm happy as the listing agent to make life easier for the buyer's agent by going and trying to get the permit early, perhaps even before the listing goes live. Because in a market like now where houses are selling so quickly, you know, the buyer's agent's going to be stuck trying to put in some sort of contingency to verify the size of the septic system, which then may blow up 2 weeks later when that Freedom of Information Act has been fulfilled and the permit comes to you and you find out it's really a 2-bedroom septic when it has 3 or 4 bedrooms in the house. And that buyer says, no, thanks. I've got 4 kids and we're not buying a 2-bedroom septic tank house. So as the listing agent, a part of my business practice is going to be to try to get a copy of that permit prior to my listing going live, or at least putting in that FOIA request, which is the Freedom of Information Act request, with the health department to try to get the permit on its way to me. But if I have not received it or I have not seen it with my own eyes, I am certainly not going to put on the MLS that it is a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom, whatever. It has absolutely nothing to do with how many physical bedrooms are in the home. Okay. Also, it is not necessarily a time for panic if there are 5 decorated bedrooms in this home, but it is only a 3-bedroom septic system. They are rated for 2 occupants per bedroom. It also absolutely comes down to usage. You know, if this is a home that's used as a rental at Smith Mountain Lake, and it's a 4-bedroom house with a 2-bedroom septic system, it is probably not going to do well for a high occupancy rental property that has turnover every single week and people are just cramming lots of people in there to vacation. It really has to do with usage. So if it is a 4-bedroom house and it's a retired couple living there and they occasionally have grandkids come stay with them on a 2-bedroom septic, it's probably going to be perfectly fine. So it also has to do with the health of the septic system. It has to do with septic systems that aren't working at their prime. Jennifer can probably speak to her own issues with her own septic system that is probably okay sized for her family, but was not functioning properly due to a leak that they discovered. And so the septic tank was filling up with water every time it rained. Well, that's going to limit the usage of that septic system. So it has to do with a lot of things. The takeaway is do not mark any of those fields other than unknown unless you have seen that permit with your own eyes. Okay. Absolutely do not ever click unavailable. Unavailable means the health department got back to you and said, there is no permit on file. That is the only time you should be checking unavailable. Okay. And then that may still bite you in the butt because they may find the permit in the future. And now you have marked the box that it's unavailable. So if you ever do mark the box unavailable because the the health department has come back to you and said they cannot find a permit and a permit does not exist, please, for the love of Pete, keep a copy of the email that told you that, so that if somebody comes back on you later, you're able to say, oh no, I marked unavailable because here is the email where the health department told me that the permit was unavailable. Okay. Save all of your emails. Online storage is cheap. Do not delete or purge emails. You never know when that's going to come back, and you're going to need to have some sort of proof of what the communication was. Okay. And exonerate yourself and me. Thank you very much. Who has any questions about septic system field on the MLS? It's tricky because you never know how the health department is filing those permits. It could be under the builder's last name. It could be under the original owner's last name. It could be under the name of the farmer who owned the 50 acres that's now been parceled up into subdivisions. There's just not a clear-cut way to find it. So, and that's a mess that the state of Virginia has to sort out. But they don't have the funds to do that, and they're not hurrying on it. So we just have to be careful because lawsuits do come up. We've had 2 lawsuits come up over septic systems. So I've got a lot of hindsight on these. And so the takeaway is just check unknown until you actually know. Also, don't check unknown and then just leave it up to the buyer. Go ahead and put in the Freedom of Information Act request. If you don't know how to do that, call us. We'll tell you how to do it, okay? And then the last one I want to touch on today before we get into our question and answer time is personal property on the purchase agreement. You do not actually want to put personal property beyond appliances on the actual purchase agreement. Unless this is a cash contract. Like most things that's a cash contract, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do because there is no lender combing through that file and looking for red flags, okay? So if you are going to be conveying a jet ski or the furniture in a condo at Smith Mountain Lake, or a really fancy lawnmower, a zero-turn lawnmower, then those need to go on a bill of sale. Okay. Keep in mind, selling personal property is not part of our licensed activities. So the bill of sale, I'm not going to be branding it with Wainwright and Company. Any old bill of sale on the internet is fine, so long as there is language in that bill of sale that ties the sale of that property, that personal property, to the consummation of that real estate transaction. Okay. You don't want to accidentally sell a buyer a zero-turn lawnmower for $1 and not tie it to the real estate transaction, okay? You're going to be in a world of hurt if that is the form you use and the buyer says, oh, looks like I own a zero-turn lawnmower for $1, okay? Those type of people do exist in the world, and they don't care that you made a mistake. So appliances are perfectly fine to go, and pool equipment too can go on the purchase agreement. The reason the lenders have an issue with this is because the value of the home is supposed to only be tied to the property itself. Well, you and I both know that if someone's buying a Smith Mountain Lake condo and it's coming with 2 jet skis, that purchase price really is also tied to the jet skis. Nobody's giving away 2 jet skis, but the lender can't place any value on that home through the appraisal on personal property. So those go on a bill of sale. The appraiser appraises just on the property, and you hope it comes in high enough to include those 2 jet skis, okay? Any questions on that? Anybody ever have a misstep on that? Anybody have a lender come back to you and ask you to remove them from the contract and stick them over on a bill of sale?
So, how would you put that on a bill of sale? Like you said, don't put it for $1 or whatever.
You could put it in for $1, but just make sure there's language on there stating that the sale is the personal property sale is consummated at the same time as the real estate transaction.
Oh, I see.
Yes, that way that personal property does not convey unless and until that real estate transaction takes place and closes. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I believe that VAR actually has a bill of sale listed in their documents. So if you go to Zip Forms and you switch your library to VAR, I believe there is a bill of sale available there. There are also oodles of them on the internet. So you're perfectly welcome to use one of those as well. Just make sure it's got some sort of real estate component to it, that it's part of a real estate transaction. Any other questions about that? Okay, well, I'm going to open it up to new business. Any new stuff people are seeing? There were 26 new listings on the MLS this morning on the hot sheet for a Thursday morning. That's pretty good in today's market. I would love to see more. We are still obviously in a shortage of listings, and there are not enough houses to sell. Walter was in the office this week, and we were both griping to each other about how we have buyers and nothing to sell them. So,
Yeah, 26 new listings and 22 pendings. No bueno.
Nope. Agreed. So, and I know it's frustrating working with buyers and you're showing them one house at a time as soon as it goes on the market. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for us. The only people happy right now are the sellers until they realize they have nowhere to go themselves. So,
Ashley,
yes, Kathy.
I have a listing on West Carrollton in the Hill that I would love to sell.
Mhm.
I would love to get an offer on. So if anybody has a buyer in that market, it's $539, but they need to sell it. So they're motivated.
And I've looked at it online. It is absolutely beautiful. And it is a lot of square footage and very, very, very premium quality build.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have anything to add? Any questions? Anything you're seeing going on that you have questions about?
On the listing that